Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Today's story is something that a lot of people don't talk about. It's like it's taboo. And I wanted to share my story because I didn't want somebody to feel the way that I did when I went through it. And to feel that, they're alone and people don't ever talk about this and there might be, is this happening to only me? And so I wanted to share my story and kind of, let somebody else know that no, you're not alone. Know that, others do go through this.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of my miscarriage story. If you missed part 1, I'll insert it up above and in the description below. So let's hop right where we left off.
Can you help me? And not in the sense of, I just needed somebody to, help me get to the bathroom. Because I had, it felt like I had a lump down there. Yes, there was this mass you felt down there. And, I'm afraid to walk. I'm afraid, I was just afraid to move. That was my whole thing. I'm like, I can't move. And so I was like, all right. And he kind of held my hand and walked me to the bathroom. And so I'm kind of sitting there and I'm literally trying to hold it together because I'm like, now I'm hysterical. I'm crying. I'm upset, and it's kind of started to come back to me as all these pains and all this stuff. And I'm like, why didn't I just go to the hospital? Why didn't I just go to the hospital? And at that moment, I kind of reached, literally, as you hear, I reached down and I literally pulled, I didn't even pull, came back up with an infant in my hand, a small little infant in my hand. And at that moment, I was even more upset. I'm like, what am I gonna do? I'm going through a miscarriage. And I'm like, this is new to me. I don't know, what do you do? So at this point now, I'm like, your girl is literally turning white. And I'm like, I'm bleeding so badly. And so my husband shows up and he's looking at me and I still have the baby in my hands. And I open my hands and he's like, oh, okay. What do you want me to do? And I'm like, help me get to a hospital, because I don't know what to do. So he's like, all right, he's trying to help me put something on that's not soaked in amniotic fluid, or, since my water broke. And so I'm like, I'm trying to get ready, and I'm like, I'm still kind of in pain. I'm like, your body's trying to get rid of all this stuff, and you're still having kind of contractions at this point. And I'm like, this is not happening. And so I'm holding the baby and I'm like, in my mind kind of goes, at this point they normally say that you can know what the sex of the baby is. And so I'm like, I go and I look and I'm like, it's a boy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, this sweet little thing, this is not what I had expected. I wanted to be able to hold you and hear you cry and all that stuff, and that is all now taken away. So my husband gets me into the car. I put clothes on, I get to the car, and he's taking me to the hospital. And by the time we had put on pads, because it was so heavy. We put on pads and kind of try to make it there. And by the time we made it there, I had soaked through the pads and literally into the car. And so I'm up and literally I stood up and you could see everything just dripping down. It was like a gruesome murder attack kind of situation that was going on. Your girl was bad. And so I made it into he made it under the emergency area, where normally like kind of the ambulance comes in. And so they had like this little, where at the hospital we were at, it had like the emergency where, you know, if you come through ambulance, they have their entrance, and next to it was where you walk into the emergency room. And literally, I'm like, my husband's like, here, you know, kind of balled up some towels we had in the car, and like he handed them to me, and I'm literally holding towels trying to walk into the emergency room. And I'm walking into the emergency room, and they had the 2 triage nurses and a security guard. And the security guard is walking up to me, and he's like, "Are you okay? Is everything?" I'm like, "No." And at this point, I'm like, I'm shaking. I'm like, and I'm kind of in and out, sort of dazed, to be exact. And I was kind of like, "No." And as he's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go. Can you stand right there? I'm gonna go get a wheelchair for you." And I'm like, "Okay." And one of the triage nurses walking up to me, and he's like, "What's going on? You know, like, what's your name?" And I'm like, "You know, this is my name. You know, I'm about," at that time, I'm like, a lot of things is going through my mind. So I'm like, I'm about 12, you know, 13 weeks pregnant, and I feel like I'm going through a miscarriage. And so security guard's coming in with the wheelchair, and he's like, "All right, we need to get her in the back now." And you know, the other nurse is like, "All right," trying to get basic information. I'm like, my husband is coming. He's I think parking the car. He has my purse and everything, and he has all my information. So when I sat down on the wheelchair, I don't even know. Honestly, I really didn't even know. And I remember kind of, you know, how like like when you have trips and you have like the flashing lights, kind of, yeah, that it was kind of like that. Like I remember, you know, I kind of saw me going through the back, and it was kind of like spots, like your girl had bits and pieces of those. And I remember rolling into the back triage rooms, and you know, they're like, "Can you get up and, you know, transition over from the chair to the bed?" And I'm like, I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I go and I get up, and nothing. Like, it felt like my legs were gone. Literally, that's what it felt like. And I remember there was another nurse behind me, and that's all I remember. And I'm like, and after I came to, I was on the bed, and they were starting IVs and everything, and my husband came into the room, and I kind of drift off again. And it was kind of like, am I gonna die? Literally. And so the pain kind of started also increasing. At this point, like, I thought I was gonna die. Like, legit, I thought I was gonna die. And I remember the nurse asking me, like, when I came to it, the nurse was asking me, you know, "Do you want to save the clothes that I had on? Do you want to save, you know, my garments that I had on?" And I'm like, I'm not taking that home. Dispose of it. And literally, you know, exactly how you see it on TV. They're not going to pull these things off of you. They're straight up cutting it off of you. And I remember she cut it off of me, and disposed of it, and they put the hospital gowns on me. And the other nurse came in, and she was like, "All right, you know, you're going through a miscarriage." And I was like, I figured when I saw the baby, I figured I was going through a miscarriage. And she's like, "Yes, you know, we have the OB doctor coming in to see you, and we're gonna decide whether or not, you know, if you needed a DNC or if you're gonna pass everything." And so at that point, it kind of wasn't, it registered to me, but it wasn't registering to me like I'm literally going through a miscarriage. At the moment, my focus was, I'm gonna die because I'm in so much excruciating pain. And I remember the nurse is like, you know, "Can you wait a while?" I'm like, I'm gonna die. Like, literally, I was screaming. And I'm like, I felt bad for the lady that was in the bed next to me, because, like, she thought I was dying. Literally, I thought I was dying. And it was traumatic. I'm like, I remember she gave me morphine just to help with the pain. And she's like, here, I can give you this, and this can help with the pain for a little bit, but, you know, try to get some rest, and, you know, we're gonna try to figure out whether or not if you gonna go in for a D&C. And so I'm like, okay, no problem. And I drifted off again. You know, my mom called. My husband was the one who, like, he was like, you know, your mom called, you know, a family was calling. Because at the time, I'm like, I left both boys with my stepdad at home, and I kind of really didn't say anything because I was still in shock. And my husband was like, kind of just said to him, I gotta run her to the hospital, and that was it. And so he kind of called my mom and let my mom know that I went to the hospital. And so when that happened, I'm in the hospital. And so they came in, they're like, all right, looks like you are passing this up, but you having excessive bleeding. And, you know, I was like, all right, you know, what does that mean? And I'm a person who is highly anemic. You know, I'm like borderline about, you know, 9 and 10. And normally it's supposed to be at least 12. And my numbers are always really low. So now at this point, like, I'm losing a lot of blood. And so I'm like, literally, I remember she came in and she's like, your iron is at a 4. And so they're like, we got to keep you, we got to give you iron infusions. You know, we got to get you back up. And I was like, yeah, your girl was literally out of it. And I remember the nurse coming in telling me, you know, we're going to keep you overnight. We got to, you know, do all these things for you. And some of the stuff I don't even remember how, like, I don't even remember going up to the room. I remember when I'm in the room, but I don't remember going up to the room and whatnot. And so to where the point I remember, I'm like, you know, that whole period passed and they're like, all right, we got you a room. And that was it. Like, your girl was gone. And I remember, you know, I remember the pain coming back. Like, the morphine started wearing off and the pain started coming back. And I was like, no, like, can you guys give me something? Like, this pain is like, you know, literally, you see the board, like, they give you like those little face things and it said from 1 to 10, rate your pain. I was at a 20. Like, I was over that. That was not even, that could not measure the pain I was going through. That's how much pain I was in. And so she's like, you know, we're gonna get you to the room, and then, you know, they'll give you medication there, you know, to help with the pain and all that stuff. And I was like, all right, fine, you know, whatnot. So we made it into the room, and I came to, and I was like, the nurse is like, all right, you know, they needed me to go to the bathroom. And I was like, all right, fine. I got up and I made it to the bathroom fine. Like, my legs had returned, like, because before it was gone. And so my legs had returned, and I walked to the bathroom, and, you know, it was a nice nurse lady. She was great. And I'm like, to this day, I'm like, as I was leaving, I said, thank you. And so she was a great help. And, you know, again, your girl was hopped up on morphine, and, you know, so I'm getting up to go back to the bed now, and literally, like, my legs were like, we worked a little bit, but we ain't working no more. And my legs wanted to give out. And I'm like, so I had to literally hold on to the wall. And she's like, give me a minute. You know, let me call somebody to come help me, because I don't want you to fall. And, you know, because she had to get a chair in order to get me back to the bed. And so with her only there, she's like, you know, I can't get a chair and leave you by yourself, because obviously, you know, safety first, you know. And so I was like, all right. So she's calling somebody else to come and, you know, help her. And the other lady comes in with a wheelchair and, you know, kind of helps, both of them helps me to the chair and bring me back to the bed. And kind of basically I was in the bed from that point on until, you know, about later on the following day. And so, you know, that night was kind of a blur for me. And so Thursday rolls around, and this happened on Wednesday. So Thursday rolls around, and so, you know, family now is kind of, you know, close relatives, like my mom and my dad, you know, kind of knew what was going on. And you know, they came to see me, and kind of everybody else, I wanted to keep it at a distance. I'm like, what not? Because now I'm like, all right, you know, everybody's gonna be asking us, like, you're in the hospital, what's going on? So I kind of like didn't exactly tell everybody, hey, look, this is what happened. And so, you know, family came and they were like, you know, how are you and whatnot. And this is the day they were starting the IV infusion. And so that morning they came in and, you know, they made sure everything was in order for that to start. And so they started that. And literally, again, like, my hemoglobin level was so low, like, I was dumb tired. Like, people were talking to me, and I can actually feel myself drifting off, going to sleep. And, you know, they were like, I remember my dad talking to me, and I was like, yeah, and I'm falling asleep. And so they're like, you know, my mom was like, you know, let's let her, you know, her hemoglobin levels are a little low, so that's why. And in our culture, you know, we're like, you gotta, you know, we kind of eat stuff that, you know, you don't need the iron supplements and all that stuff. So my mom was like, all right, you know, when you get home, I'm gonna make X, Y, and Z for you, because we don't want you to be at this point, because again, I've went through that before with my iron levels had gone down to not that low, but about a 7, and I remember that time, and it was horrible. And so that went on for that whole day. And so I was like in the hospital, and, you know, my husband stayed with me. My husband, you know, he still had to go to work and everything, and once he gets off, he would go home, eat, take a shower, and then come spend the night. So then it was like, all right, you know, that was Thursday, because again, your girl didn't remember much for Thursday. And then Friday hits, and it was a disaster. Like, I was a mess. Because now I'm like, you know, my hemoglobin is back up, and I'm feeling a lot better, you know, and whatnot. And everything hits me. Like, I just went through a miscarriage. I just lost a baby. And I'm like, no, this is not supposed to happen. I'm like, you know, why did this happen? All this questions, all this was going through my mind. And it kind of like, they had like the grief counselor come out and try to talk to me. And I was like, I don't understand why this happened to me. And leaving, I remember calling my husband, and he was like, I'm in tears crying. And he's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, why did this have to happen? You know, like, he could even give me an answer for himself. He's like, I don't know, you know, it happened for a reason. And I'm like, at the time, I'm like, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. And again, I'm like, I always agree with a lot of people. It's like, at the time when people, you know, they try to give you their sympathies and whatnot, and a lot of times you don't know what to say. And a lot of people, you know, kind of say stuff, and it kind of feels like, that's not what I want to hear, you know. No. And it was at that moment I understood, you know, being on the other side, you know, there's some stuff like, you know, even if they say it to you and they mean it out of the kindness of their hearts, you know, it still hurts. It doesn't make the situation any better, you know. And I was like, I don't want to hear that. No, that makes no sense. Like, why is it that my baby is not here anymore? Why was his life taken away? And so, and again, you never get that answer. And it was, I left that. My mom came and picked me up because my husband was went to work that Friday, and by the time he got off, it was already too late for him to pick me up from the hospital. So my mom brought me home, and I remember I came home and I laid in the bed, and I honestly, at that point, I did not want to do anything. I wanted people to just leave me alone. I was upset at the world. I was upset with the man upstairs. We're Christian. We believe in God. And so I was upset with him because, I always grew up knowing that, God gives you, he never gives you more than you can handle. And I was like, if he gave me this, what was the point of him taking it away? And a lot of times I still question that at some points. And so it's kind of, hard. Like at one point I said, why should I believe in God if he's going to turn, he's going to give me the most precious gift of all and then take it away? And I was confused. I didn't want to, do anything. I was upset at the world. I was upset at, you walked past me. I was upset. Literally. I was depressed. I didn't want to do a lot of things, go out. My husband was like, hey, let's, and I was like, no. If you want to go out, go out. You want to hang out with, your brothers, your friends, I don't care. You go do you. I don't want to do none of that. I hated the world at that point. And so I remember, trying to pick up the pieces, and I'm like, I don't want to do this. I'm like, what is there for me to pick up? It took me a while, and I'm like, you know what? I have 2 boys I have to take care of. I have to get back on track. I got to put a smile on my face because they're looking at me like, what is wrong with you? And, even though I know at the time, my 1-year-old didn't understand what was going on. And again, I was like, I had to be able to take care of him and do what he needed. And, even though I know also my 11-year-old he didn't know what was going on because, again, we hadn't, come out and told family or told anybody that, we were expecting. And so at that point I was like, is that the reason why, my child, my baby got taken away, was because we had it announced? When we were kind of waiting for the right time to tell people. So then we were like, okay, I was like, is that the reason why? Because I kind of was waiting for the right time to tell everybody. And so when people kind of brought it up, I was like, oh no. And did God kind of feel that I was denying this child? And in actuality, I wasn't. I had already made plans. I was, preparing nursery. I was, elated. So it got to the point where, now everybody in my class group was announcing that, they're expecting. So now I'm like even more upset at the world because I'm like, how is it that, everybody else gets to have their baby? And again, I'm like, I'm happy for everybody who announced that they were pregnant and everything. But I was like, I wanted to be, I was pregnant. I wanted to be able to carry my child to term. And I was upset. And, it got to the point where I said, you know what? I tried to talk to my husband. I was like, you know what? Can we try again? And he was like, the time's not right. I was still in nursing school. And he's like, it'll be best. I want to wait a few years. And I'm like, I I don't want to wait that long. I already got into the whole gist of this. So yes, I was so upset with the world, and him for telling me, hey, let's wait. And now that, time kind of has passed, no, I still have that wound. I still, it's still very emotional for me. And, I had one of my friends come up and kind of tell me, she was pregnant, and what I always wanted to do was to be a part of her, baby, plan her baby shower and all that stuff. And at the time, it was still a very emotional process for me, and I kind of had to back away and say, the thought about it, I couldn't do it. It was too much for me to actually, go through with the plan. And so I had to step back. And, I kind of had to not say cut my relationship with her, not at all, but it kind of took me back, because I'm like, it kind of still hurts to this point, because I'm like, why couldn't I carry my baby at a time? Is it my body's just not good enough? Like, why is it that my body had to fail me? Not only me, but this innocent child. And so, and it works for everybody else. And again, as I said, this is something that a lot of people don't talk about. Like, it does happen. And, it was afterwards you would hear, like, I went to a support groups, and you would hear people talk about, they're going through this, or they went through this, and this is what, they're going through, and they, their feelings, their thoughts, and their emotions are in it, and to have something ripped away from them. And it kind of made me realize that I'm not the only one. And so I was always wondering, like, but why don't you ever hear this? Why don't, more people kind of, I understand it's kind of your own personal business, your own, you're going through it by yourself. And so I was like, I had to kind of share my story in a sense that to let others know that, you're not alone. It does happen, and it happened to me. And again, I was nowhere near prepared. I never had this happen before, and I would never wish this on my worst enemy. Like, that was and is the hardest thing for anybody to go through. And so, you come to kind of in the beginning, you're numb, basically. You're numb, and I was numb for months. I was going, like, I just felt like I was just going through the motion because I had to go through the motions, but I felt like I was numb. And especially around times like, this year, I just, went through the whole anniversary, like when I found out I was pregnant. And I literally, when that happened, I broke down and I cried. And I was like, a year ago, this time this year, I would have, a baby, and I didn't get to see this child. And what hurts the most is that, you don't get to know this person. You have a lot of what ifs, who would this person be, how their, characteristic personalities and all this stuff. And you kind of are just left with ideas and, what little memories you have. And, it's kind of a bittersweet, and it hurts. Trust me, there are days I would literally, would wake up and I was like, I want to just cry. And, the anniversary of my baby's passing just recently passed and made it a year. And I was like, wow, like this time last year, I went through the most devastating life experience that I could ever go through at the time, and this, you know, losing a child is worse. It's bad. And losing anybody is bad, you know. And you kind of build this connection with a human being you haven't met with, and you're like looking forward to, you know, meeting this person, and to have that kind of ripped away from you, it changes you, you know. And it's kind of like, I would love to have people, you know, there's awareness and all that. I would like to have, you know, people understand that it's not the end of the world, and that, hey, like, check up on your friends if they're going through that, you know. Call and be like, hey, I was thinking about you, I know you're going through some stuff, you know. Keep it simple. You don't have to be over the top or, you know, whatnot, but just check in, you know. I wish that was something that kind of happened for me, because I think I might have moved along in the grief process maybe a little bit faster than I did, and it kind of didn't happen like that. So it is what it is, you know. I'm happy for the loved ones that I have in my life, but again, in our culture, like for me, in my family, you know, my parents are from Haiti. So again, this is something that is not talked about. You don't kind of, if it happens, it happens, and you just move on. And so it was kind of that way when it happened, where nobody talked about it. Nobody, you know, the ones that did know, never said anything about it. And it was kind of like, all right, to this day, you know, I remember coming home, after I came home, and my mom's, I had a picture of the baby. Like, after everything happened, I had a picture of the baby, and I remember my mom, after she saw that, and that was the end of the conversation. We never talked about it anymore. And so, yeah. And so it was kind of like, I felt I was going through it by myself. And my husband, it was kind of like, you know, a new experience for him. But again, it was kind of not like let's talk about it, you know, I tried kind of like, hey, how are you feeling, sort of thing. And it kind of was like, you know, I'm all right, I'm fine. And it wasn't kind of reciprocated back. And I kind of felt like even more like I was going through it by myself. And so it would kind of draw me to, like, you know, it's not something that it's not something that is talked about. It's not something that, you know, like, you're pregnant, you're expecting, you share the good news. Yes, you know, there's times you might not want to there's some things you know you want to keep to yourself, but again, I feel that it helps in the grieving process to be to have someone, you know, check in and be like, hey, I know what you're going through, I went through it, you know. That helps a lot. You know, hearing stories of other women that went through this kind of helped me, like, understand that, okay, you know, it does happen. It's not, I wasn't just the only one that went through this. This happens, and I ended up, like, hearing the statistics of 1 in 4 women go through this, and, you know, during pregnancy, and it can happen at any point, and it can happen for numbers of reasons, you know, and you have no control over it. You know, you could wake up, everything looks fine, everything looks perfect, you know, you had a doctor's appointment today and baby's doing great, and tomorrow that's not it anymore. You know, that life is gone and taken from you. And there's people who don't even get to have that experience, don't even get to see the baby on the ultrasound, you know, just the positive test. That's all they have. And, you know, it's a long road back, and you're never the same after that. And so I wanted to come out and be like, hey, you know, I went through it. It's still a work in progress for me. I'm still trying to make it work. I'm still, you know, trying to get back to life before. And I understand that it would never be like that, you know, and it's a work in progress. So yes, that's my story for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave me a comment down below. You know, let me know if you guys ever went through something like this, and tell me what you think about the video. So yes, thanks for watching. Bye.